Ethan had never imagined that his life would take him so far from Earth. He had always been fascinated by the idea of exploring new worlds. But it was one thing to dream about it, and another thing entirely to actually move to a planet. Light years away from everything familiar, Lithara was his new home, a world with purple skies at sunset, forests that shimmered with faint bioluminescence, and cities that seemed to float above the ground. His job as an engineer in a tech corporation had offered him this opportunity, and although part of him felt nervous, another part was thrilled. This was the adventure he had always wanted. When Ethan arrived, the first thing he noticed was the quiet. The residential block assigned to him was smaller than he expected. Rows of houses lined the street in a neat, symmetrical pattern, but there was an eerie silence. He thought he would feel lonely, but he didn't feel afraid. He was curious. As he walked toward his apartment, he noticed movement out of the corner of his eye. Figures seemed to shift behind the windows of the neighboring houses. He slowed down, peering carefully, but the figures disappeared. He shrugged. Probably just other workers, he thought, trying to calm the sudden pang of anxiety. But deep inside, he had a strange feeling that these neighbors were not like humans. There was something different about the way they moved, something almost too graceful to be ordinary. He tried to shake off the thought. After all, Lithara was known for having many unique species. Ethan unpacked his things in silence, arranging his few possessions carefully in the small apartment. The walls were a soft metallic gray, with large windows that let in the light of the planet's twin moons. He set up his small workspace near the window, hoping to enjoy the view while he worked on his engineering projects. When he finally sat down, he heard it, a faint whisper, like wind brushing against glass, coming from the apartments across from him. He froze. For a moment, he thought it might be his imagination, but then he saw it, a pair of eyes glimmering faintly in the evening light, staring at him. They were large and golden, and when they blinked, the light reflected across the window like sunlight on water. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He had expected aliens, yes, but he had not expected anything like this. He ducked slightly, pretending to adjust something on his desk, hoping whoever it was would disappear. They didn't. Slowly, more eyes appeared, and he realized that these weren't human eyes. They were larger, more elongated, and seemed to belong to creatures with scales. Panic mixed with fascination. Ethan had read about dragon women in Litharan, history legendary beings who were intelligent, protective, and highly social. No human had ever lived in a neighborhood entirely of dragon women, at least not according to the old records. And yet, here he was, right in the middle of one. Days passed, and Ethan tried to settle into a routine. He went to work, came home, cooked simple meals, and attempted to interact as normally as possible. But every time he stepped outside, he felt watched. From a distance, dragon women would appear at windows or balconies, tilting their heads curiously, sometimes whispering to each other in a language that was melodic, almost musical. At first, Ethan was intimidated. They were huge compared to him, their scales shimmering in subtle colors depending on their mood. But slowly, he started to observe them without fear. He noticed patterns. The dragon women were always in groups, moving in synchronized ways, whether they were doing chores, gardening, or simply walking along the street. They communicated with gestures, tail swishes, wing flicks, slight color changes in their scales, and with soft vocal tones. Ethan began to feel like he was learning a secret language, one that didn't need words, but carried meaning anyway. One evening, as the twin moons rose over the city, Ethan decided to take a walk. The streets were calm, the light reflecting off the smooth pavement, and the air smelled faintly of the exotic flowers that grew along the sidewalks. He passed one of the dragon women's houses, and a figure stepped out onto the balcony. The moonlight hit her scales, and for a moment she seemed like a statue carved from precious metal. Her golden eyes met his, and she tilted her head slightly. Ethan froze. "Hello?" he asked softly, unsure if she could understand him. She didn't answer, but her tail swished once a signal he didn't understand. Then she disappeared back inside. Ethan exhaled, realizing his curiosity had outweighed his caution. But even as he walked back to his apartment, he felt a strange excitement. There was something incredible about living here. This neighborhood wasn't ordinary. He was surrounded by beings that had existed for centuries. Yet they were living, breathing, and watching him carefully. The next day, he tried to learn more. He watched their routines from a distance, noting when they left for work how they interacted with each other, the subtle ways they expressed emotions. He realized these were not dangerous creatures. They were intelligent, organized, and very social. But they were also protective of their territory. A wrong step, a careless action, and he could upset them. He decided to try something daring. During a mid-morning break, he waved at one of the dragon women who was tending a small garden in front of her house. At first, she froze. Then her eyes narrowed slightly. Slowly, she returned the gesture, tilting her head in a motion that seemed almost like a smile. Ethan felt a rush of relief. This was the first sign that he might be able to connect with them. By the end of the week, he had established a small routine of greeting his neighbors from a safe distance. Every day, he learned something new, a flicker of color in the scales that meant curiosity, a slight wing flap that meant playfulness, a tail swish that meant caution. Each small interaction filled him with awe. He was living in a neighborhood that humans had only read about in history books, and yet he felt a growing sense of belonging. One night, as he lay in bed looking out at the glowing city below, he thought about the journey ahead. He was terrified, yes, but he was also exhilarated. He had no idea how life would unfold here, but one thing was certain. Moving to Lethera was nothing like he had imagined. And living among dragon women? That was going to be the most extraordinary experience of his life. Ethan had spent his first week on Lethera, observing his neighbors quietly, learning their routines from afar, and trying to understand their strange but beautiful culture. Yet nothing could have prepared him for the moment when he had his first real encounter with them. It happened unexpectedly, as most life-changing moments do. One evening, after a long day at work, Ethan returned to his apartment carrying a small box of groceries. He was tired and eager to settle in, but as he approached the hallway leading to his apartment, he heard a sudden, soft humming sound. It was melodic, soothing, and unlike anything he had ever heard on Earth. He paused, unsure whether to investigate or retreat. But curiosity won. Carefully, he stepped toward the source of the sound and found himself standing in front of the doorway of the apartment. Next to his dot, before he could knock or even think of what to say, the door slid open, revealing a dragon woman standing there. She was taller than him, her scales shimmering in shades of bronze and green that reflected the ambient light of the hallway. Her wings were folded neatly against her back, and her golden eyes studied him carefully. Behind her, he noticed two more dragon women peering from the side, equally cautious but curious. Ethan froze. Hi, he said awkwardly, holding the grocery bag in front of him like a shield. I'm Ethan, your neighbor. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, the tallest of the dragon women, who must have been their leader, tilted her head slightly and spoke in a soft, melodic voice. You are human, she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, and the way she said it carried both curiosity and surprise. Yes, Ethan replied, trying to keep his voice steady. I just moved here for work. The dragon women exchanged glances. Their tails flicked lightly, wings shifted slightly. And Ethan realized that every movement carried meaning he couldn't fully interpret yet. After a few tense seconds, the leader's eyes softened. You make sound like friend, not danger, she said. Ethan breathed a small sigh of relief. Yes, I don't want to cause any trouble. I just want to live here peacefully. At that, the dragon women seemed to relax. They stepped back slightly, gesturing for him to come inside. Ethan hesitated, but the warmth in their movements and the absence of hostility encouraged him. Carefully, he stepped over the threshold into their apartment. Immediately, he noticed the difference in environment. Their home was decorated with luminous crystals, plants with soft glowing leaves, and intricate carvings that covered the walls. It was beautiful, unlike any human home he had ever seen. One of the dragon women, younger than the others, and with scales tinged in light blue, approached Ethan cautiously. She held out a small bowl filled with sweet, fragrant fruit. Eat, she said softly. Her tail swished gently as she waited for him to respond. Ethan smiled, feeling a mix of nervousness and wonder. He accepted the offering and took a small bite. The fruit was unlike anything he had ever tasted, sweet, with a hint of spice, and a texture that was both firm and juicy. "Thank you," he said. The dragon women nodded. One of them, who appeared older with deep amber scales, stepped forward. "You live among us now. You must learn. We watch each other. We help each other. You understand?" Her speech was slow, deliberate, as if choosing each word carefully, ensuring Ethan could follow. "Yes," Ethan replied. "I want to understand. I want to learn." And so, his real introduction to dragon women culture began. That night, they guided him through their customs. Ethan learned that they were extremely protective of their neighborhood and of each other. A sudden noise, a falling object, or even someone unfamiliar entering their space would immediately draw attention. They had a shared sense of responsibility, almost like a collective mind, where each dragon woman looked after her neighbors as if they were part of one extended family. Ethan also learned about their gestures and nonverbal communication. A flick of a tail could indicate excitement or curiosity. A slow wing stretch could show patience or relaxation. And the subtle change of scale color could reflect mood or intent. It was overwhelming at first, but Ethan was fascinated. Every glance, every movement had meaning. He realized that living among them was not just about physical proximity, it was about understanding and respect. The dragon women were also deeply social. They invited him to sit at their table and share a simple evening meal. They didn't speak much at first, letting him eat in silence, but every so often, one of them would tilt her head toward him or make a small humming sound, checking if he was comfortable. Ethan felt a strange sense of warmth, a feeling he hadn't expected from beings he had imagined as fierce and distant as days passed. He became more involved in the neighborhood life. The dragon women allowed him to help with small chores, watering the luminescent plants, arranging decorations, and even fixing a broken piece of furniture. Every task he performed was met with careful observation, but also with appreciation when he did it correctly. One evening, after he had helped repair a damaged balcony railing, Lolita Sarad, as she had introduced herself, nodded slowly. "You help well, you understand little." Ethan smiled. He realized that even small efforts mattered to them. His respect, patience, and willingness to learn were slowly earning him trust. And that was the key. On Lithara, trust was not given lightly, especially to a human who had just arrived. One particularly memorable incident cemented his place in their eyes. A small gas leak occurred in the apartment building. Ethan smelled it first, a faint metallic odor, and immediately alerted the dragon women. They reacted instinctively, their wings unfurling and tails swishing as they moved in coordinated patterns to warn others and evacuate the area. Ethan helped them locate the source and shut it off, using his human engineering knowledge to prevent a dangerous explosion. The dragon women's eyes widened in surprise and admiration. One of them whispered something that Ethan didn't understand, but the tone was warm, approving, and grateful. After that incident, Ethan felt a shift in their behavior toward him. No longer was he merely the human living next door. He was someone they could rely on. They began to include him in small rituals and neighborhood discussions. He learned the importance of festivals, shared meals, and evening walks. Each day he discovered a new detail about their culture, a way to fold wings, a specific sound that indicated agreement, or a color pattern on scales that showed joy or concern. Ethan also noticed how deeply they cared for each other. The dragon women rarely acted alone. Decisions were made collectively, and every action seemed to have thought and consideration for the group. Ethan found this fascinating, though sometimes confusing. On Earth, people were more individualistic, and decisions were often personal. Here, every choice had to be weighed in the context of the community. One quiet evening, Ethan sat on the balcony of his apartment, looking across at the dragon women's houses. He felt a mixture of awe, nervousness, and excitement. These creatures, who had seemed so intimidating at first, were now his neighbors, teachers, and even friends. He had no idea what the future held, but he knew one thing: He was no longer an outsider. He was becoming part of their world, slowly but surely. And that world was more incredible than he had ever imagined. As the twin moons rose over the city, casting soft light across the shimmering rooftops, Ethan felt a strange calm. He was scared, yes, but he was also exhilarated. He had survived the first real encounter, learned the basics of their customs, and earned a small measure of their trust. More importantly, it glimpsed the warmth and intelligence of a community that seemed alien but felt strangely welcoming. Ethan smiled to himself. Living among dragon women would be challenging, he knew that. There would be misunderstandings, cultural gaps, and moments of fear. But there would also be beauty, friendship, and experiences unlike anything he had known on Earth. And as he looked at the glowing city below, he felt certain that his life on Lethara had truly begun. Ethan's life on Lethara had begun to settle into a rhythm, but every day brought new surprises. After his first week of cautious observation and his first real contact with the dragon women, he had started to feel like he belonged, in small ways. But belonging on Lethara meant more than just showing up. It meant participating. Understanding and respecting their world in ways humans rarely experienced. One morning, Ethan woke to the soft hum of the city outside. He stretched and looked out the window. Across the street, a group of dragon women were already up and moving gracefully. Tending to their small gardens and checking on one another, their wings flickered lightly in the morning breeze, and the subtle shifts in their scale colors reflected a sense of calm and alertness. Ethan realized that he had begun to recognize these signals. A soft pink shimmer meant contentment. A pale blue glow meant curiosity. And a flicker of deep gold indicated careful attention. Ethan decided that today he would take a step further. He had observed long enough now. It was time to actively participate. He gathered some basic supplies from his apartment, including a small watering tool and a few packets of plant nutrients, and walked over to the garden of the dragon woman who had first offered him fruit. Her name, he had learned, was Lyria. She was smaller than some of the others, with light green scales that shimmered faintly in the morning sun. But her movements were precise and confident. "Good morning," Ethan said, trying to sound casual as he approached. Lyria's eyes flicked toward him, and she tilted her head. Then, in a gesture Ethan had learned meant permission, she stepped aside to allow him into the garden. Ethan knelt and began tending the plants, mimicking the movements he had observed. He watered carefully, brushed away fallen leaves, and made sure each plant received proper attention. Lyria watched silently, occasionally adjusting a plant herself, but mostly letting Ethan work. After a few minutes, she spoke softly. "You. Learn fast. You. Help well." Ethan felt a surge of pride. Praise from a dragon woman was not given lightly, and this acknowledgement meant he was being accepted. He smiled and nodded, continuing his work with renewed energy. Over the next few days, Ethan became more integrated into the neighborhood routines. He helped repair a small fence that had been damaged in a recent windstorm, organized supplies in a shared storage area, and even learned how to light the soft glowing lanterns that lined the streets. Each task came with subtle instructions, conveyed not through words alone, but through gestures, expressions, and the shifting colors of scales. It was a completely new way of learning, and Ethan found it exhilarating. One afternoon, as he was assisting Lyria with arranging a series of glowing crystals along her balcony, a loud noise suddenly echoed from the street. A small hover vehicle had lost control and was skidding toward the sidewalk, where several younger dragon women and children were walking. Instinctively, Ethan shouted a warning, and the dragon women reacted immediately. Wings unfurled, tails flicked, and in perfect synchronization they moved the children and themselves out of harm's way. Ethan ran forward to help, guiding the hover vehicle with his knowledge of human mechanics to bring it safely to a stop. When the situation ended, there was a moment of stunned silence. The dragon women looked at Ethan with a mixture of surprise, gratitude, and newfound respect. Lyria stepped forward, her eyes glowing softly. "You. Save you. Help you. Understand more." Ethan realized that in that moment, he had crossed an important threshold. He was no longer just an observer, he was someone they could rely on. That evening, a small gathering formed in the central courtyard of the neighborhood. The dragon women invited Ethan to sit with them while they shared food and discussed the events of the day. Ethan felt a little nervous, but honored. He had never been included in something like this before, and he wanted to show that he understood and respected their culture. As he sat among them, he noticed the way they communicated. It wasn't just through speech. Small movements of their tails indicated agreement or hesitation. Shifts in wing position showed excitement or attentiveness. Changes in scale color reflected emotions that they might not even have spoken aloud. Ethan tried to follow along, learning to read the subtle language of gestures. It was complicated, but he found it fascinating. During the conversation, they, the leader, turned toward him. You, human, you, learn. Care, you, become part. Her voice was soft, but her words carried weight. Ethan felt a warmth in his chest. Being recognized as part of their community was more meaningful than he could have imagined. Over the next few weeks, Ethan and the dragon women began building small routines together. Each morning, he helped tend the gardens and maintain shared spaces. In the evenings, he joined them for quiet walks through the glowing streets. They taught him about the plants, the crystals, and the ways their ancestors had shaped their homes. Ethan found himself fascinated by their history and culture, eager to absorb as much as he could. One day, Lyria invited him to help her with a small creative project. She was crafting a series of woven ribbons made from shimmering fibers collected from the forests around the city. Ethan watched as she carefully braided and intertwined them, using gestures to indicate where he could assist. At first, he fumbled, unsure of the technique, but she guided him patiently. Slowly, his hands learned the rhythm, and they worked side by side, creating something beautiful. By the end, Lyria smiled, her eyes glowing in approval. You learn. Faster than expected, she said softly. Ethan grinned, feeling a sense of accomplishment and connection. Through these small interactions, Ethan realized something profound. Living among the dragon women was not just about survival or learning customs. It was about forming bonds. Each gesture, each shared meal, each small act of help was a thread weaving him into the fabric of their community. He felt a growing affection for Lyria, not just as a neighbor, but as someone who had welcomed him with patience, curiosity, and kindness. At night, as he returned to his apartment, Ethan reflected on the progress he had made. He had gone from an anxious outsider, observed cautiously by mysterious neighbors, to an active participant in their lives. He had learned to read their signals, assist in meaningful ways, and earn their trust. And yet, he knew there was still so much to discover. Lethera was vast, and the dragon women's culture was deep and complex. Each day brought new lessons, new challenges, new moments of wonder. Ethan's growing bond with the dragon women also taught him about patience. They moved at a different pace than humans, carefully considering each action and its impact on the community. At first, he had been frustrated by how slowly things sometimes unfolded, but he began to see the wisdom in it. There was a rhythm to their lives, a balance between action and thought, between care for oneself and care for others. Living among them required adapting to that rhythm, and Ethan found that it brought him a surprising sense of peace. One quiet evening, Lyria approached him as he was preparing a small meal in his apartment. She offered him a simple gift, a small crystal that glowed faintly in her hand. For you, she said, her tone gentle and warm. Ethan accepted it with gratitude, feeling a deep sense of connection. This was more than a token. It was a symbol of trust, of friendship, and of acceptance. As Ethan held the crystal, he realized that he was no longer merely a human visitor in this world. He was part of something larger, a community that had at first seemed intimidating and strange, but which had opened itself to him slowly, carefully, and generously. He thought about the first day he had arrived, when he had felt nervous and uncertain. How far he had come in just a few weeks? Living among dragon women was not without its challenges. There were still moments of confusion, of misunderstanding, and of caution. But each of these moments was an opportunity to learn and grow. Ethan had discovered a new way of seeing the world, one that valued observation, patience, and respect for others. It was a lesson he would carry with him for the rest of his life. As he looked out over the glowing streets that night, he felt a profound sense of belonging. The neighborhood, once mysterious and intimidating, had become a home. The dragon women, once distant and wary, had become friends, teachers, and companions. And in the soft glow of the city lights, Ethan knew that this was only the beginning of his journey. He had crossed the threshold from observer to participant, from outsider to insider. The bonds he was forming would shape his life on Lithara in ways he could not yet imagine. And he felt ready, more than ever, to continue learning, exploring, and growing alongside these extraordinary beings. Over the weeks that followed, Ethan's life on Lithara became more than just a routine. It was filled with small adventures, learning, and moments of connection that slowly transformed his understanding of what it meant to live among the dragon women. He had moved from being an anxious observer to an active participant, and now he began to feel something deeper, real bond, especially with one dragon woman who had consistently guided and supported him. Lyria. Lyria had a gentle curiosity about the world, and she seemed genuinely interested in Ethan's perspective as a human. She would often invite him to walk with her through the glowing streets of the neighborhood, pointing out small details that he might have missed. The light from the twin moons reflected off her scales, creating patterns of shimmering greens and golds that mesmerized him. She explained the significance of each plant, each decoration, and each ritual they performed. With every interaction, Ethan felt more accepted and more comfortable in the community. One afternoon, Ethan noticed Lyria struggling with a heavy load of water containers. Without thinking, he rushed to help her. "Here, let me carry some," he said, taking one of the containers. She looked at him, surprise flickering across her face, and then she smiled, a slow, warm smile that made his chest tighten. Her tail flicked lightly, a subtle gesture he now recognized as appreciation. Together, they carried the water to the small garden courtyard where several other dragon women were tending to plants. Ethan worked carefully, following the instructions Lyria gave him. She guided his movements with gentle nudges and soft words, never scolding, always encouraging. The simple act of working side by side deepened their connection. Ethan realized that this bond was different from any human friendship he had experienced. It carried a sense of shared purpose and mutual respect that transcended words as days turned into weeks. Their interactions became more personal. Lyria would bring him small gifts, fruits, hand-woven ribbons, and occasionally a glowing crystal. Each gift was accompanied by a gesture that conveyed care and attention. Ethan learned that in Lytheran culture, these offerings were not just material, they were symbols of trust and friendship. He began to reciprocate in his own way, offering small gestures of help and thoughtful actions, trying to show that he valued her and the community. One evening, the neighborhood prepared for a local festival. It was a celebration of harmony, trust, and connection among the residents. Lyria invited Ethan to join her for the preparations. "You come," she said softly, her eyes glowing warmly. "Together, we make ready," Ethan agreed eagerly, feeling honored. The festival involved decorating the courtyard with glowing crystals, arranging plants in intricate patterns, and setting up small ceremonial lanterns. Ethan worked alongside the dragon women, his human perspective often providing practical solutions that complemented their traditional methods. They moved together with a rhythm he was gradually learning to follow, a dance of cooperation, patience, and precision. During the preparations, Ethan observed the way the dragon women interacted with each other. Their movements were coordinated, respectful, and deeply caring. Each action had meaning, and each gesture was a form of communication. Ethan realized that he had learned more than just practical tasks. He had learned to read subtle cues, to anticipate needs, and to respond thoughtfully. This understanding allowed him to contribute meaningfully, and it also deepened his sense of belonging as the festival began that evening. The courtyard was transformed into a shimmering display of light and color. Lanterns floated in the air, glowing softly. Crystals reflected the twin moons above, casting gentle patterns on the ground. And plants arranged with care seemed to radiate their own subtle energy. The dragon women gathered together, forming small circles, and began their traditional dances. Each movement told a story of trust, connection, and shared history. Ethan watched from the side at first, unsure how to participate, but Lyria took his hand and guided him gently into the circle. "Step. Follow. Feel," she whispered. Ethan moved slowly, mimicking her movements. At first, he stumbled, unsure of the rhythm. But as the dance continued, he began to feel the flow of the community, the unspoken communication, the shared energy, the trust that bound them together. By the end of the dance, Ethan felt a profound sense of inclusion. He was no longer an outsider. The dragon women recognized him as someone who had earned a place among them, someone who had shown respect, patience, and care. Lyria's eyes met his, and she gave a small nod, a gesture that conveyed both pride and affection. Ethan felt a warmth he had never experienced before, a feeling of being truly seen and appreciated. The festival continued with shared meals and storytelling. Ethan listened intently as the dragon women recounted tales of their ancestors, of challenges overcome and bonds strengthened. He realized that these stories were more than entertainment. They were lessons in trust, resilience, and community. As he shared his own experiences from Earth, the dragon women listened with interest, asking questions and showing genuine curiosity. Ethan felt a deep connection growing, a sense that his presence mattered and that he was valued not just for his abilities, but for who he was. As the night drew to a close, Lyria led Ethan to a quiet corner of the courtyard. She handed him a small glowing crystal, similar to the one she had given him before, but this one pulsed with a soft, steady light. "For you," she said, her voice gentle. "Show care, trust together." Ethan accepted the crystal, feeling its warmth and the significance behind the gesture. It was more than a gift, it was a symbol of their bond, of his acceptance into the community, and of the trust they had built together. In the weeks that followed, Ethan and Lyria's bond continued to grow. They spent time exploring the surrounding areas of the city, sharing quiet conversations and learning from each other. Ethan taught her about human tools and technology, while Lyria introduced him to local plants, traditions, and cultural practices. Each day, he discovered something new, not just about Lethera, but about the possibilities of friendship and connection across worlds. The other dragon women also became more comfortable with Ethan, involving him in decisions, small projects, and daily routines. They trusted him to contribute meaningfully, and he began to understand the balance between independence and community. Every action he took was observed, and every gesture was understood in context. Ethan realized that living here required mindfulness, respect, and genuine care for others, a lesson that extended beyond any manual or guide. One afternoon, as Ethan helped Lyria repair a small water fountain in the neighborhood garden, she paused and looked at him closely. "You. Human. You. Different. Not like others. You care. We trust," she said. Her words were simple, but the meaning was profound. Ethan smiled, feeling a mix of pride and humility. He had come to this planet expecting challenges, but he had also found friendship, respect, and a sense of belonging that he had never imagined. Ethan also began to notice subtle changes in himself. He felt calmer, more patient, and more attuned to the world around him. Living with the dragon women had taught him to observe carefully, to respond thoughtfully, and to value the perspectives of others. He found joy in simple tasks, pride in helping, and fulfillment in being part of a community that cared deeply for one another. One evening, as the twin moons rose once again over the glowing streets, Ethan and Lyria sat together in the garden courtyard. They watched the soft light reflecting off the crystals, listened to the gentle hum of the city, and shared a quiet moment of companionship. Ethan felt a profound sense of gratitude for Lyria, for the neighborhood, for the opportunity to experience a world so different yet so welcoming. He realized that he had crossed another threshold. He was no longer just a participant. He was a friend, a trusted neighbor, and someone who mattered to the dragon women. The bond he shared with Lyria was a symbol of that connection, a reminder that understanding, patience, and care could bridge even the widest gaps between worlds. As he returned to his apartment that night, Ethan reflected on how far he had come. He had faced uncertainty, fear, and the challenge of living in an entirely new world. But he had also experienced wonder, friendship, and the joy of being accepted into a community that valued him. He knew that the journey was far from over, but he felt ready for whatever lay ahead. Strengthened by the bonds he had formed and the lessons he had learned, living among dragon women had changed him. It had taught him empathy, patience, and the importance of connection. And as he drifted off to sleep, he felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that he was no longer alone on this distant planet. He was part of something extraordinary, a community, a friendship, and a life that he had never imagined but had come to cherish deeply. Time had passed quickly on Lethera, and Ethan had grown more comfortable with his life among the dragon women. What had started as curiosity and cautious observation had blossomed into genuine friendship, trust, and belonging. He now moved through the neighborhood with confidence, greeted warmly by the dragon women who had once watched him from afar. But one event was about to take his journey to an entirely new level, an event that could cement his place in the community and deepen the bond he shared with Lyria. The Festival of Harmony, which Lethera celebrated every few months, was approaching. It was the most important event for the dragon women, the time to honor trust, connection, and the relationships that strengthened their neighborhood. Ethan had attended small preparations before, helping decorate and organize, but this festival was different. It was bigger, more elaborate, and included a traditional ritual that honored meaningful bonds between individuals. Lyria had invited him to participate directly, a gesture that carried immense significance. On the morning of the festival, Ethan woke early, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. He dressed carefully, mindful of the subtle customs Lethera required. Every detail mattered, from the way he moved to the items he carried. He checked his reflection in the smooth glass of his apartment window. Although he looked human, he felt connected to the neighborhood in a way he had never imagined. He was no longer a stranger. He was a part of this world. As he stepped outside, he was greeted by a chorus of soft humming sounds, the dragon women communicating in their melodic way, sharing excitement and anticipation. Lyria appeared first, her scales glinting in the light, and motioned for him to follow. Together they walked to the central courtyard, where preparations were already underway. Lanterns floated above, crystals glimmered on the ground, and colorful ribbons hung between the structures. The air was filled with a faint, sweet fragrance from local flowers, creating an atmosphere both magical and serene. The festival began with a series of coordinated dances. Each movement was purposeful, telling a story of connection, respect, and history. Ethan watched carefully, studying the gestures, the shifts in wing positions, and the subtle flicks of tails that communicated emotions. Lyria guided him to stand beside her as the dances progressed, encouraging him to follow the rhythm and movements. At first he stumbled, unsure of the steps, but her steady presence gave him confidence. Slowly he found the flow, moving with her and feeling the shared energy of the community. After the dances, the ritual of trust commenced. This was the most meaningful part of the festival. Dragon women who shared deep connections would demonstrate their bond through a ceremonial act, involving small crystals that pulsed with soft light. Lyria took Ethan's hand gently, guiding him forward. Together, she whispered, her voice melodic, "Show trust, care." Ethan's heart raced. He realized that this was more than a tradition. It was a symbol of acceptance, recognition, and the bond they had built over weeks of learning, helping, and sharing. As they performed the ritual, Ethan felt a profound sense of belonging. Every step, every gesture, and every pulse of the crystal reinforced that he was not merely a guest in their world. He was part of the neighborhood, trusted, appreciated, and valued. Lyria's eyes met his, glowing warmly, and he saw pride, affection, and a shared understanding that words could not fully capture. The moment was quiet, yet it carried immense significance, a silent declaration of friendship and mutual respect. Following the ritual, the festival continued with shared meals, laughter, and storytelling. Ethan sat among the dragon women, enjoying delicacies he had never tasted before, fruits with unusual textures and flavors, warm baked dishes with a faint glow, and sweet herbal teas that seemed to soothe the spirit. They listened intently as he shared stories from Earth, fascinated by his perspective and the differences between their worlds. In turn, they told him tales of their ancestors, their challenges, and their triumphs. Ethan realized that these stories were more than entertainment. They were lessons in resilience, cooperation, and community, passed down through generations. As the festival drew toward night, a quiet moment arose. Lanterns floated gently above the courtyard, casting soft, shimmering patterns across the ground. The dragon women gathered in small circles, sharing glances, gestures, and whispers within. Illyria stepped aside, enjoying a brief pause from the celebration. She handed him a crystal, glowing softly in her hand. "For you," she said. "Remember, trust, care, always." Ethan accepted it with gratitude, feeling the warmth and significance of her gesture. That night, as the twin moons reflected off the rooftops, Ethan walked back to his apartment, feeling a sense of peace he had never known on Earth. He had arrived on Lethera, expecting challenges, unfamiliarity, and isolation. Instead, he had found friendship, trust, and a community that welcomed him. The dragon women had not only accepted him, they had included him in their lives, shared their culture, and allowed him to become a part of something extraordinary. In the following days, Ethan noticed the lasting changes in his relationships. The other dragon women, inspired by the ritual, began treating him with more warmth and inclusion. They invited him into discussions, shared tasks, and small celebrations that went beyond daily routines. Every interaction reinforced his sense of belonging. He realized that he had moved from being an observer to a participant, and to a trusted friend, and now to someone regarded as part of the family. Lyria continued to be a guide and companion. Their bond deepened naturally, built on mutual respect, shared experiences, and genuine care. They explored more of the city together, learning about local customs, plants, and structures. Ethan taught her small things from human life, like tools, problem-solving techniques, and strategies for maintaining equipment. She, in turn, showed him the subtle ways of dragon women communication, the meaning behind scale colors, gestures, and the rhythms of social interactions. One afternoon, while repairing a small structure near the edge of the courtyard, Lyria paused and looked at him with thoughtful eyes. "You, human, changed. Not like before. You understand, care, belong," she said softly. Ethan felt a deep warmth in his chest. He had not only adapted to this world, he had grown into it, learned its lessons, and earned a place within it. Her words reflected the journey he had undertaken, from uncertainty and fear to trust, belonging, and shared purpose. Ethan also reflected on the personal changes he had experienced. Living among the dragon women had taught him patience, empathy, and the value of community. He had learned to observe carefully, respond thoughtfully, and appreciate the perspectives of others. He felt calmer, more aware, and more connected, not just to Lethera, but to life itself. These lessons were profound, extending beyond survival or cultural understanding. They had become a part of who he was. In the evenings, he often sat with Lyria in quiet moments, watching the glowing city and sharing thoughts. They spoke of their experiences, their hopes, and the small joys that made life meaningful. Ethan realized that this companionship built slowly through trust and shared action was one of the most valuable gifts of all. It was not about grand gestures or dramatic events, but about presence, attention, and genuine care. Weeks passed, and Ethan became fully integrated into the neighborhood. He knew the routines, understood the subtle cues, and could communicate effectively with the dragon women through both gestures and words. He had participated in festivals, helped in emergencies, and contributed to the community in meaningful ways. What mattered most was the relationships he had built, friendships that transcended species, trust earned through effort, and bonds that brought mutual understanding and support. One morning, as Ethan prepared for work, he noticed the dragon women gathered near the entrance of the neighborhood. They greeted him with soft hums and gestures of goodwill. Lyria approached, her eyes glowing softly, and handed him a small, intricately woven ribbon, threaded with shimmering fibers from the festival. "For you show, belong, always," she said. Ethan accepted it with gratitude, realizing that it symbolized not only his personal journey, but also the enduring connection he had with this extraordinary community. As he walked to his workstation later that day, Ethan reflected on his experiences. He had arrived on Lithara expecting a challenge, perhaps even isolation. Instead, he had found acceptance, friendship, and a community that valued him. The dragon women had transformed his understanding of connection, trust, and belonging. He realized that the most extraordinary part of this journey was not the alien world itself, but the bonds he had formed and the life he had built within it. At night, as the twin moons cast their soft light over the neighborhood, Ethan looked out across the rooftops, the glowing gardens, and the shimmering lanterns. He felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude and contentment. He had found a home in a place far from Earth, among beings he had once feared and now cherished. He was part of something larger, something extraordinary, a community, a friendship, and a life that embraced him fully. Ethan smiled, holding the crystal Lyria had given him. It pulsed softly in his hand, a reminder of trust, care, and connection. He realized that he had not only survived on this new planet, he had thrived. And as he looked at the dragon women moving gracefully through the streets,